What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Brewed Opinions podcast. We got a special holiday edition, KT. What's going on, dude?
Not much, man. I'm just excited to start talking about our topic tonight.
We have a special topic tonight. KT, what is it?
Coming off of Survivor Series, which kind of led to Survivor Series, was factions. Like, factions going against other factions, four-man teams. Could be more than that, could be less than that, but like the whole team aspect of wrestling, I think, was created when Survivor Series, got started or led to, Survivor Series. And the first faction I ever remember, Jay, was the Four Horsemen. We don't have to get into details about it, but Ric Flair, Arn Anderson,
Tully Blanchard.
Yeah. It was unbelievable. And then the different variations through the years. I mean, Chris Benoit was a member at one time. That ex-football player, Steve Michaels, remember he was in that
It was
era there.
A lot of
Flying Brian
variations.
Pullman was in it at one point in time. The Four Horsemen. I mean, anybody that ever sees the Four in professional wrestling, that is just probably the kids today don't know about it unless their dads have showed them. But but Ric Flair, I mean, that's the first stable I ever remember as being like, you wanted to be a part of it. They were wearing the Rolex. It was Ric Flair completely. The best of the best, which ends up leading to a variation of that in WWE later years down the road. But Evolution.
Yeah.
Flair brings the Four Horsemen to the WWE. They had never been there before.
Yeah.
But it was a different name. And
yeah. KT's all over it tonight. All over it, dude.
And that moment of the Four Horsemen was what, H, Orton, and Batista.
Well, Evolution was Flair, Orton, Batista, H.
Yep.
Yeah, and then eventually
they didn't throw the fours up, but it was kind of the same thing. The jet flying. This is the cream of the crop. We are what.
And then the young guys took it to Legacy. So it was a variation of it. Obviously they.
I'm gonna say it's the same thing as the Four Horsemen, but
yeah, I mean, me personally, like when I think of factions, I think of the greatest faction / story / everything that changed the landscape of professional wrestling as it is today is the NWO.
Yeah.
The NWO. And
it's
I'm
the
talking
granddaddy
about
of them all,
early man. NWO.
Before it got fucking stupid.
We can talk about the very beginning with the start. The Outsiders showed up, and that's when there was blurred. You weren't sure what you were watching, whether it was real or fake.
Right.
And I think that's what Eric Bischoff's plan was so good, was to say, is this real or is this fake? And that was the first thing I think that we saw in wrestling, was when the NWO and the Outsiders showed up.
Oh, yeah. I remember we've talked about it. We've talked about the Monday Night Wars a lot.
Yeah.
NWO led to the Monday Night Wars. Well, even before that, just Hogan leaving. All the guys from WWE who were past their prime, that were like in the Cena stage of their careers a couple years ago, when Rock got to that point, Stone Cold, but they still wanted to wrestle. They still had a draw on their name. They went over to WCW. Like, Hogan was making a name for himself over there. Macho Man came over, and then all of a sudden, a little duo, Razor Ramon and Diesel, show up as their true names.
They didn't come over there because those were WWE,
Kevin Nash and Scott Hall.
They were WWE properties. When they showed up as the Outsiders, they were just ticket holders in the stands.
Yeah.
They were like, it was so well done. If you think about that time, we had never seen anything like this.
Shenanigans on us that they were even getting TV time, because it was a real takeover. Yeah. We would have known that.
Yeah,
this was a part of the story. But I'm freaking. But this was 14 years old at the time.
This was pre-social media.
Right.
So social media wasn't ruling the world like it does today.
And getting wrestling backstage knowledge was only through like magazines and like online
and that
clips.
Was even still.
And this is the beginning of the internet era, like where like most people still. I mean, what we have dial up at that point in like 96.
AOL.
This is like 96, 95, like when this is all going on. I was a freshman in high school.
When those two guys showed up, and you were just like, what is going on? You had no idea what was going on. And then they created a story about the third man.
Yep.
And the third man, we've talked about it on this podcast. The third man is what changed, was probably one of the most epic moments in the history of professional wrestling. It was the night that one of the most beloved baby faces of all time in the history of wrestling, synonymous with the name of wrestling. If you say wrestling, you say Hulk Hogan. It's that simple. And the third man, I was there. I was at Bash at the Beach.
Think of at that time, like saying Hulk Hogan's name was like saying The Rock today. Like that,
bigger than that.
And yeah, probably bigger just because of like the era of news and news getting out.
It's like Babe Ruth in baseball, Michael Jordan in basketball.
I mean, it truly
Hulk Hogan was wrestling. And you can say wrestling today and everybody knows Hulk Hogan. And that night,
Hogan wasn't even the best in the ring.
No.
His just persona, his everything about it. I mean, from the time I was 5 years old till that moment in high school, and you know, it's just like Hogan was still like the guy for me.
No, it really was. I mean, this was the third man storyline was kind of the way the NWO started to build their faction when they started to add members. Obviously, Hulk Hogan, who became Hollywood Hulk Hogan, was the first one. And the storyline that night in the ring in Daytona Beach, Florida, I was in that arena, dude. I was in that arena.
And to know the Outsiders are showing up at every Monday Night Nitro, and they're just wrecking house. So Hogan and Macho, who are the megalomaniacs, who were best friends in WWE. Macho followed Hogan over to help him. You know, that's part of the storyline that WCW was telling at the time.
There's no way that Hogan's coming out to not help Macho Man.
Yeah, so Hogan doesn't show up for the whole match. Macho's left.
They don't have a third man.
Right.
You know, they were supposed to have a third man in the match. The Outsiders were supposed to have a third man.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you have the Outsiders wrestling on TV.
Right. Yeah. It goes back to show. Well, fucking Hogan's music hits. He comes running down the ring, and you think he's going to save Macho, and he drops the fucking leg on him.
The leg heard around the world.
The atomic leg bomb.
That interview afterwards with Howard Finkel. Mean Gene. Mean Gene in the ring, and the fans are just throwing trash. And they even referenced trash in the promo.
And Hogan flips in that moment, and he's, you know, he was always about taking
vitamins,
you saw your prayers.
You saw him that night. He didn't know if he could do it. He's talked about it like he didn't know he could do it. And when the people started throwing trash in the ring, I think that's really what got him going. And you could see he kind of turns in that moment, and you can see the look in his eyes. You're like, this is good. This is it.
Yeah. Oh, and he tells the fans that they're trash, and it's just like it's typical of you guys to be doing.
I got a question for you. Do you remember who the fourth member was?
Ted DiBiase.
Right.
$1 Million Man.
Yeah, they started.
He was the financing behind everything.
Yeah, they started to really add. I mean, we can talk about these factions. Like part of the reason I want to talk about this in this episode is, you know, we're starting at the top. We're starting at the greatest faction of all time. I know Kenny talked about Horsemen.
I was thinking of more stables. Like
I would
before factions became a word, it was more stables.
Yeah.
Like, so you had like the legendary Hart Foundation.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like I want to also talk about like the demise of the faction too. Yeah. Like NWO was the coolest thing on the planet when we were young, and
also
it forced NWO forced WWE, WWF at the time, to change their system that they were running.
To go live.
But then, Katie, talk a little bit about the downfall of NWO and what contributed to that.
Basically, there was nobody running. Well, the next variation of NWO was, so the NWO is getting bigger and stronger. Like Hogan and the Outsiders are running everything. Then Ted DiBiase shows up. And Virgil shows up. Anybody that remembers Virgil was Ted DiBiase's guy back in the 80s. He was like his first hand, his limousine driver. Like he was his guy who took care of business. Ted DiBiase always won because he had help, you know. So they take over. Well, then they end up that the owner of WCW, or not the owner of WCW, but the guy who's running everything, Eric Bischoff, in a typical Vince McMahon turn, but not at that point in time. Vince had never been that guy. Bischoff turns heel and joins the NWO. Now he's the guy who's behind everything. And it just kept getting more and more bizarre to where they end up splitting the NWO between, two different factions of it. And
yeah, it got to the point where they went from the Wolf Pack to the Red to the Black.
Then there was a Latino NWO with Conan and
LWO.
Yeah, everybody just started joining the NWO. Like, there was a point where half the roster was NWO because they were trying to tell a story where NWO was taking over. They were going to be the new promotion, and that they were burying WCW.
Yeah, that led to the downfall of NWO.
It led to too many wrestlers with say.
It led to the downfall of WCW.
Yeah, it led to too many wrestlers having say in every storyline. Basically, what do they say? Like Bischoff said, "I let the prisoners run the asylum."
Yeah,
like it just got to the point.
And that's
Sting, Flair. I mean, all those guys were done with this shit at this point in time. Like,
and that's why we could almost lead into another faction that left WCW to go to WWE that were some of the greatest wrestlers in the history of wrestling. But when NWO died, essentially ECW died, or WCW died.
Yep.
And the WWE kept it alive. They tried to bring back, and they had their great kind of final moment at WrestleMania. I believe it was in the WrestleMania in San Francisco at Levi Stadium when Sting wrestled Triple H. Yep. And then DX came down, NWO, and it was the big standoff that everybody wanted. Right. Because I think a lot of people can argue that the next biggest faction was DX.
Right.
Not that DX got stupid and got big like NWO, because I think DX never really died.
No, they didn't die. And they actually were as popular, if not gained more popularity, just because of like
what they were doing.
What WCW forced Vince to go into, like we always talk about, the what's the era?
Attitude Era.
The Attitude Era.
Well, let's talk about like DX, like KT. Who are the members of DX?
Shawn Michaels,
Triple H,
Chyna, and
X-Pac.
And X-Pac were the original.
Yep, and then they added the New Age Outlaws.
So they had a run with those first four, and it kind of ran its course. But it was awesome. They were doing all kinds of shenanigans shit. They were making fun of the NWO. I mean, there was... this ended up being later with the new version of the DX when the New Age Outlaws showed up, where they show up at WCW on a live
and they
TV.
Drive the tank. Yeah. And Eric Bischoff to this day says the best thing I could have ever done was open that door.
Yeah.
And let them drive right in.
But DX comes out with the Suck It, and I mean...
Kids all over town are like...
Oh, we're in high school. Young kids are doing that to their parents. Everybody's just saying Suck It. I mean, it was a completely different attitude and era in wrestling. Really was. I mean, and they both forced each other to go that way, because NWO was doing crazy shit on WCW. There was no holds barred over there. There's no holds barred on WWE now, down there live.
Yeah.
Like, the Monday Night Wars, like we talk about all the time, it's one of the best eras of wrestling of all time.
And they've tried to duplicate it with AEW. It's not going to. That was a moment in time that happened.
Just everything timed up right.
That happened organically.
Where media was at that point, where TV was
just
at that point.
Just imagine what that era would have been like with social media. No social media. You were tuning in every night to see what happened.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been allowed to happen. Yeah. Just like today. Like when WWE and these wrestling promotions try to do things today, there's so much information you can go get that, like...
It's so hard to surprise the fans.
Yeah, you still had kayfabe
like, how about when,
Like, you still
when Cody had to hide in a trailer for 24 hours? When Seth Rollins returned to attack Roman Reigns at one of the pay-per-views, like... They had to hide in trailers so nobody could catch a picture of them. Coming in this arena with hoodies on.
Yeah.
Like,
because if you don't think there's hired help from other outlets that are like, if you just get a picture and send it, here's a couple 100,000 in your pocket. Like,
yeah, that's what, like, can you imagine what these industries would have been like? What DX and the NWO kind of battle would have been like with social media.
Yeah.
It would have been insane. Insane.
It would have been cool.
But, I mean, when I think of factions, those are the two that truly stand out to me. Like, that was my era.
Yeah.
Everybody that grew up in the late 90s can recite the entry to New Age Outlaws. Like, that was one of the greatest things. The whole arena singing, or not singing, but saying their catchphrase or their speech or whatever.
And it started like that thing, just like NWO did with WCW, where like it was the wrestlers against authority. D-Generation X allowed Stone Cold to go against, like, allowed Vince to step in as the corporate authority and start putting his, like, I'm not letting everybody do this. And it just created better and better TV. Like,
the different thing that WWE did than WCW did was WCW had the NWO faction to go against authority, where WWE had individual people.
Right.
Stone Cold, at moments The Rock,
DX,
Triple H. It just, they kind of rotated
Yeah.
throughout. Stone Cold was always the one, but the Rock was in and out of another great faction, the Corporation.
Was there a time too though when Stone Cold was like the corporate dude?
Oh,
It was like a moment, like a split moment in time. But
well, he went during the invasion angle.
right.
During the invasion angle, when around this time when they went, I remember when. Wow, we're gonna get off topic here.
Yeah, we don't need to get off topic. That'd be the story for another day. But
yeah, but like those are the two factions that really stand out to me. And I know, Kenny, you talked about the Four Horsemen already, but I want to ask you, like,
well, see, the Four Horsemen were going against NWO in that time frame.
An older version of the Four Horsemen, like not the original Four Horsemen.
No. Later time. Like, this is when Benoit was in it. Chris Benoit was a member of the Four Horsemen. You know, I think Dean Malenko even joined it at one point in time.
Yep,
you know, then they showed up as the Radicals in WWE during the WCW.
The Radicals showed up that
crossover.
night. That night when the Radicals showed up on Raw with Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko, everybody was like, who are these fucking guys?
Yeah.
And then they all, like, Eddie Guerrero hits the frog splash, Benoit hits his concussion friggin' head drop, Dean Malenko does the figure four or whatever his move was, and Perry Saturn, who was a chiseled...
Didn't he have the rings?
Yeah.
Rings of Saturn.
Rings of Saturn. It was basically like a Walls of Jericho type deal or something. But, like, when those guys showed up that first night, when they all hit their everybody's like, who are these fucking guys?
Yeah.
And then we came to learn, you know, who Eddie Guerrero was, Latino Heat, and Chris Benoit, and everything great he did until his life ended, and Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko, who is probably one of the greatest minds and still produces wrestling for
one of my favorite in-ring performers as far as technical wrestling, because like I've mentioned on the pod before, like I love the technical wrestlers, like Bret the Hitman Hart, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit. Like, these guys were...
I think it's hilarious. We just went NWO DX to the Radicals.
Yeah.
Like, that, they didn't see that coming. But, like, that the reason the Radicals came to our mind was how they came in as product. They were a product of a poorly run WCW.
Came in,
and then
as
soon later was Jericho came, and then a whole new era started.
And came in as a faction, but then every single one of them. I mean, I guess you could even say Perry Saturn did have some like individual success, but Chris Benoit ends up going to be a champion. Eddie Guerrero ends up going to be a champion.
Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit win the belts on the same night at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
One of the greatest finishes of WrestleMania of
Dean
all time.
Malenko, I don't think ever got to championship status, but I think he won like Intercontinental Gold and Tag Team Gold. Like, these guys come over from another promotion, and at the time that was unheard of to cross over unless you were cream of the crop. Like, Flair was able to do it. He was probably one of the only ones that could ever really cross promotion.
Sure.
Hogan did it when he went to WCW. He got the belt over there, but other guys weren't doing that.
Well, because Vince wouldn't allow it.
Vince wouldn't allow it, and Ted Turner wouldn't allow it.
If you were coming from a different company, Vince was going to bury you.
Mm-hmm. So this was like the first time you got to see like a faction come over to a new thing, because WCW got ended by the whole Monday Night War thing, and you saw new superstars born. Eddie Guerrero ends up having one of the great careers in WWE, and he started over in WCW.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great time in wrestling, and just
that was
a changing point in everything.
Do you have, current day? We've had some good factions. I don't want to say current day, but like 10 years.
Yep.
We had a nice little feud not too long ago, 5-6 years ago. We had two great factions that were always in the mix, the Shield and the Wyatt family.
Oh, yeah.
The Shield is...
The Shield was another thing, too, and we talked about them. They started in, NXT?
They did, but not as the Shield.
No, they debuted on Raw as the Shield.
The Shield, but they were all established guys from NXT.
Yep.
And I mean, I remember the first night. I can't recall for the life of me who they destroyed, but they went after kind of like what we've always talked about with Solo Sikoa. Should have made a splash. They went after the biggest guy the first night.
It wasn't a Cena.
It could. I think it was Cena. I'm drawing a blank. I don't want to.
I'm almost pretty sure it was Cena.
But like the Shield, Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose, aka Jon Moxley, Seth Rollins.
Seth freaking Rollins.
Yeah, no, he wasn't Seth freaking Rollins yet.
No, I know.
But these guys were just like
the Hounds
came
of
out with a
Justice.
miss. Yeah, I mean, it was
Riot
so good.
gear. They were like new security. They'd come out from the stands.
I just loved how they allowed them to do this. And when the Shield came out, everybody was like, okay, it's serious stuff. And it
was a mix of different type of wrestlers. You had Roman, who's like the all-powerful, strong muscle guy. You had Seth, who's like your heartbreak kid. Shawn Michaels, body type, a performer, going to put on a show. And you had the lunatic fringe and Dean Ambrose, right? Who was the crazy one. And it was like, man, that was great. Like putting together a team that was just ready to take over the WWE at the time. And I can't remember. I guess they were sick and tired of like the whole Cena thing and everything, but they were there to announce their fucking authority.
Yeah. And when they came out, like it was unbelievable. And the way they told that whole story, and then, kind of what we're going through tonight is when it ended was probably one of the greatest nights ever when Seth freaking Rollins turned his back and the chair shot heard round world. When
and isn't that the night he joins Triple H and stuff because he's promised to be the man in WWE.
And Triple H said, I always have a plan B.
Yeah.
And when he hit Roman with the chair and the look on Dean Ambrose's face when he looks at him and is like, what are you doing? And then he hit... That night was the birth of Seth Rollins.
It was.
The architect.
The architect.
Yeah.
He was behind everything.
It was so good. And that whole story from start to finish. And the feuds they had. The Wyatt family. I don't even know if we have a show long enough to dedicate to Bray Wyatt.
Yeah. No, we'll do that at some point.
But it's the Wyatt family feud that the Shield had. The Wyatt family Shield, Luke Harper, Eric Rowan, the matches that these guys had were unbelievable.
And look at the Usos.
Yeah, they had that. I'll never forget the three-way tag feud with the Shield, Usos, and the Wyatt family in some combination of people. It was so good. I mean, the Wyatt family deserves their own show.
Yeah. And we're gonna do one.
And we can't we don't even want to include them on this faction list because they are something beyond a faction.
Yeah.
They are
it's just talking about Bray's whole
yeah
person as a wrestling mind, wrestling character, just everything. Like we'll talk about that documentary at some point because that'll include everything.
Yeah, the Shield though, Wyatt family feud was phenomenal. But the Shield is going to go down, in my opinion, as one of the greatest factions, dominance, and then and then their breakup. Like if you think about the breakups of factions, that's one that comes down to. It wasn't like NWO, which organically got destroyed. It was a systematic destruction with Seth Rollins.
Right.
It was a planned destruction.
Well, guess what else is mirroring the NWO, in my opinion, a little bit. The latest faction we've seen, which has been amazing.
Yeah.
The Bloodline. We're at a point, we've been talking about it, like it's starting to get a little stale. I don't know where we're going with this. And if they keep adding and keep doing things and they don't keep...
But not only talking about current day, like the origin of the Bloodline. When you always knew that Roman and the Usos were connected.
Right.
They had their early stages where they were helping each other out, but they never called themselves the Bloodline.
Right.
That happened organically. And I think that when the Bloodline started, the ebbs and flows and the addition of Paul Heyman, the addition of Sami Zayn, like I still think the Sami Zayn part of the story is just fantastic.
Yeah. And that he's still part of it.
Back, yeah. And he crossed and defied Roman Reigns. And now he's back as part of the original Bloodline.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting storytelling. I'm starting to get.
I don't want to get you too focused on the current situation.
Right,
I want
right,
you to
right.
appreciate what it is.
Oh, it's beautiful. I've went back and rewatched like the whole evolution of it.
Oh yeah,
and it's like years in the making. Like it's been brilliant, and I can't wait to see where it goes. We'll see where it goes, but
yeah, I mean the conclusion of it should be interesting. I don't know where they go with the conclusion of it.
And I don't think it ever gets sold unless Roman finally gets to that point. And I think it was during the COVID year when they were doing the show in Tampa in front of the screens and everything, when him and Heyman come out and Roman solidifies everything.
I'll be honest with you. Like I went to a SmackDown one night in Orlando, and we were there. And when Roman came out, it was something different.
Right.
It was special. And I remember telling my daughter, I was like, this is nothing like I ever grew up with. I grew up with glass shattering, instant pops. But
can you smell what the
when you can go out there and put together just a slow walk and a look and a theme song that was just an aura that is untouched. Like what the Bloodline is something is turning into not just a faction but a storyline.
Yeah.
The NWO was a storyline.
It was. So we'll see where the story gets told, man, because I don't know.
We're not done with it. That's the beauty of this one. We're not done with it.
Yeah. I just hope they go in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, appreciate what it's been though so far.
I do.
Yeah. It's been unbelievable. Unbelievable. What about like some of these old factions that may not be as popular as what everybody knows that's listening to the pod? Like how about those mid to late 90s, early 2000s factions that people may not remember that me and you remember?
Like the Taker's Ministry of Darkness. We
Ministry
were
of
talking about
Darkness.
that.
Yeah.
The Corporation.
The Corporation, the Brood.
The Brood.
The Brood. One of the biggest heel factions of all time. Had some of the biggest heat that I've ever seen a faction get. Rights to Censor.
Yeah. And we've talked about them a little bit recently. I think we talked about them last week.
Stevie Richards. The Godfather. And Ivory.
Yep.
They got some of the biggest heat because they were trying to censor all the Attitude Era.
Yeah.
And the people didn't want that censored. They wanted to watch Tori Wilson run around in a bikini, Sable run around and
who wouldn't?
Yeah. But that was what was so good. They got so much heat, man. When I was watching Rights to Censor, I remember that I used to hate it when they came on the screen. And looking back now, that was phenomenal heel.
Yeah.
Phenomenal heel work.
It was awesome. Just like, I mean, talking about that same like era timeline, when WWE started the Nexus show, before NXT was ever even started, and you had like developmental, and you had this new group of characters that they started.
Bray Wyatt.
Wasn't it like each superstar on the roster had a protege that they had to groom?
Daniel Bryan.
Yeah.
With The Miz.
Yep.
Husky Harris, who was Bray Wyatt.
Yep.
Husky Harris came back as Bray Wyatt.
Wade Barrett, who ends up turning the thing into a faction. He takes all the undercards that were
brilliant,
getting shit on, and starts this new kind of NWO-esque thing where they're going to take over the WWE because they're better than the WWE superstars.
Brilliant. It was brilliant.
It was awesome. And then that leads into like
CM Punk.
There's two versions of Nexus. There's the Wade Barrett Nexus, then there's the CM Punk Nexus that sparked CM Punk's career.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the whole pipe bomb, like, that leads up to everything. Like, his moment in that time, like...
Man, I didn't think we were going to get on Nexus in this pod.
Dude, Nexus was awesome. That was a good run for WWE for, like, a couple years. I mean, you had all the big players in... I mean, this is before the Shield debuted, because like, this is before NXT.
Yeah.
I mean, Nexus was a huge deal.
Another John Cena getting destroyed by another faction. They came out and destroyed him.
Yep.
And that was Wade Barrett, Daniel Bryan, Husky Harris, which would later become Bray Wyatt. I can't think of the redhead guy. I got kids.
Oh yeah, I remember.
I can't remember.
There was a couple other guys.
Heath Slater.
Heath Slater. Yeah. Oh yeah. He ends up creating himself later on. Yeah, Heath Slater was awesome.
Yeah.
No, Nexus was really good. It jump started a lot of careers for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was a good faction. I mean, what about like we sit here and talk about the DX and Rights to Censor, Ministry of Darkness. We brought up in this. Let's talk about the Brood. Like this is kind of in that Attitude Era.
It was
Gangrel.
The Hardys are just becoming something.
So you got Gangrel, Edge, and Christian, and the whole vampire type theme.
Right. Hated it. I hated it initially.
Yeah.
I was like, "What is this bullshit? What are we doing?"
But then you loved it.
Well, I ended up loving Edge and
Respecting
Christian.
it. But then Edge and Christian then go into the biggest
when they turn on Gabriel, right?
Gangrel,
yeah. When they turn on him, and they take like
when they go into probably the greatest 3-way storyline feud that you could go into in tag team wrestling. Dudley Boys, Hardys, Edge and Christian.
Another time when everything matches up right in time, like with the tag teams where WWE was at the time, and like what the WWE universe was looking for. You had 3 tag teams that could, I mean, all the tables, ladder, chairs matches. I mean, they all had their specialty. I mean, we had a couple years of just them all beating the shit out of each other, titles changing hands.
It was great. I mean, I challenge you to tell me another tag team during that era. I don't think you could.
We probably could, but I mean, I think the Acolytes were around, and then the RAPA,
the Acolytes,
but they were different.
The Hardys, or not the Hardys, the Hollies.
Yeah, I mean, but those were the 3. Those were the 3.
There was nobody else even in there.
And then even from that, the superstardom individual-wise that came from that. Like we talked about earlier before on the podcast about tag teams, and like there's always one. Edge and Christian had 2. Both Edge and Christian end up becoming.
Yeah,
I mean, they're still going at it
all from
today.
They're going at it on AEW.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the Brood probably created 2 little Canadian guys to becoming superstars.
What about another faction that was just like a faction between wrestling companies, but the Dudley Boys, the Dudley family?
Yeah,
like, I mean,
everybody just remembers Bully Ray and Devon, but how about Spike?
Spike. You had the other members that were from like in ECW and different things, but I mean the Dudley Boys, like that whole thing, and then Matt and Jeff both had their own individual superstardom, not only in the WWE, TNA, different organizations.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's
factions are good for building that. It's just like tag teams, like.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good things that have like faction wise that like we can sit here and talk about with not only from our childhood, but like we have potential. I mean, like I said, I would love to sit here and talk about the Wyatt family, but like I said, there's one episode that's not long enough to talk about the Wyatt family because they are special people. Bray Wyatt was a special individual.
Even the fact that what Bray Wyatt did, there's a faction now on WWE TV that's in his honor and his vision and everything. I mean, I'm sure fucking Bo Dallas came across his brother's books and is like, oh, this was the next vision. It feels like he's channeling them all the time,
Yeah.
dude. I think with the White Six is like,
Yeah.
I just hope WWE does the right thing by that story.
Yeah, they will. They just better not let it die. Yeah. I mean, what about like, I mean, going back, like, is there a faction that stands out like in another company?
Well, Bullet Club, we've talked about them before.
The Bullet Club still exists today in some fashion in New Japan. I mean, it's not your mainstream people that are in it, but like look at the people that have been part of the Bullet Club: Cody Rhodes, Finn Balor as Prince Devitt,
AJ Styles.
Gallows and Anderson, AJ Styles.
Kenny Omega, right?
I need a beer.
Wasn't Kenny Omega a part of it? I mean, yeah. I mean, You used to tell me about the Bullet Club because you were paying attention to a lot more things than I was back then, and then I started watching it. I'm like, yeah, that shit is awesome.
It's the Bullet Club is, I would say, more of an independent scene. It didn't get mainstream until kind of Cody got involved with it. But it had existed for so long, and so many different people ran it, from Cody Rhodes to AJ Styles to Finn Balor to Jay White to...
And the cool thing is they even still, like... The cool thing about where WWE is now is that they kind of at least honor it and acknowledge it. Like when Gallows and Anderson came over and was with AJ, they're doing the Too Sweet, which is another nod to NWO.
Yeah.
I mean...
Like, I don't know, like, right now with the Bullet Club right now is kind of weird because it's in New Japan and it's got a lot of Japanese wrestlers involved with it. It's not as mainstream as it was at one point. You do have a formation of it still in AEW with Jay White and Juice Robinson and guys like that are still... You always just associate them with Bullet Club. And then when AJ Styles left TNA, went to he basically took it over from Finn when Finn left New Japan to come to NXT. And then kind of the same thing happened with Cody and AJ.
Right.
Like it was
I forgot that AJ left TNA, went to New Japan, took over for Finn.
Yeah, and then Prince Devitt, and then Finn came over and did his whole thing. And then it's the Bullet Club is company spread out between companies. From now, even
those guys seem like they're always members, and like they can always bring it back. Like wherever, I don't know if New Japan owns the rights to it. I don't think they do. I think the Young Bucks do, don't they?
Here,
yeah, I'm just doing like Dan talk, like here we're going. But like, don't the Young Bucks own that? Don't they own the rights to that name? Like they're...
I don't think that. I don't think the Bullet Club.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that. I don't think they own that. I think it was.
Oh, they joined when. Like...
I think it was originated in New Japan. But I don't think anybody claims it where you can't use it.
Right.
It's a Vince McMahon move.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool then.
Yeah.
And that's probably why it's allowed to be put back across every situation.
He's doing the Trump dance.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other ones that, may stand out? I mean, I know we talked about some the other company. Like we had the Main Event Mafia in TNA, which had some pretty big hitters with Kurt Angle and Sting and things like that, where they went head-to-head with the Aces and Eights. Aces and Eights had Bully Ray, Devon, had Gallows. Like, the Aces and Eights was kind of a sneaky good faction in TNA.
Yeah, I enjoyed it when I was watching that.
They were always doing crazy stuff.
Yeah, that was a cool thing. That was a different era in TNA too. Like,
I mean, they had the Canadian faction with Eric Young, Scott D'Amore, who was running it, who's now running, I believe, TNA behind the scenes. You basically had that faction because they used to have the World Cup. Do you remember the World Cup where all the countries and Canada? Yeah, with the X Division. Mm-hmm. With that old six-sided ring, I mean, TNA really got on the map with that I mean, they were AEW before AEW was there, and they actually challenged.
They did. They had a little moment in time.
Yeah, when they got Kurt Angle to come over. Oh man, we're going off topic, but
no, we should do an episode at some point. Like, speaking of off topic, we won't go there, but we should do an episode about when wrestlers change promotions, like the impact they made when they got there, how good it went for however extended amount of time before it got shitty again or changed direction. I mean,
but it was like that whole era with the Aces and Eights, Main Event Mafia. The Aces and Eights were awesome.
Weren't they going after Hogan and stuff and Brooke Hogan at that point?
Yeah. There was a lot of stuff. Well, that's kind of when TNA kind of lost their way a little bit. I would say the Main Event Mafia versus the Aces and Eights were a little bit more structured. But you didn't know what they were going to do. That's what was cool about it.
Yeah.
And they had people that you didn't know who was in it. And they pull the mask off, and you're like, "Oh my God, he's in it!" You know, it's TNA had a little fire, a little spark in the bottle there for a minute.
They did. They got me tuning in.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. Bully Ray was running the show, and that was the first time you really saw Bully Ray not be a Dudley Boy.
Yeah,
you kind of saw this. You know, he got kind of fit. He grew the beard. He got serious. Nice he got serious, and you're like, oh, I'm watching Bully Ray now, but he's not a Dudley Boy. And then Devon, not a Dudley Boy. And then you had Gallows. I can't even remember everybody that was in the Aces and Eights. I think Ken Anderson was in there. Mr. Anderson was in there.
He was awesome.
Yeah. So there was a nice run. I think the Aces and Eights kind of like made you pay attention to Bully Ray as someone other than a Dudley Boy.
Oh, that was his moment.
Yeah. And then now he's still carrying, and that's why there's a difference between Bubba Ray, who's a Dudley Boy, and Bully Ray.
Right.
Bully Ray is the non-Dudley Boy.
Yeah.
And that's what he's actually had. This second half of his career has gone over, and he's actually come back to NXT and helped Trick Williams out. And, he's on the biggest talk show on Sirius XM radio and Busted Open. So, I mean, he's kind of got himself a nice little gig now.
Yeah, and he's awesome on there, too.
Yeah. But
hearing his wrestling mind, that's the cool thing about, like, when you get to hear stuff like that. It's like these guys who are doing that now is like, you hear their wrestling mind, and it's, like, awesome.
Yeah, when you listen to guys like Tommy Dreamer, Bubba Ray, Bully Ray, Mark Henry, you listen to these guys talk about the business, and then it's all run by LaGreca, who's a fan. Like, so you're getting both sides of it. And, just to wrap that up, I mean, Aces and Eights was one of my favorite factions outside of WWE.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been many that you can stand. I mean, Bullet Club is phenomenal. And, but as far as, like, going back, like you said, to those original days of Survivor Series. Survivor Series is the second longest running PLE next to WrestleMania.
Back then it was more wrestling stables. Factions.
So talk about one that you haven't even said tonight.
Who's that?
The Hart Foundation.
The Hart Foundation?
Your boy.
Yeah, Bret the Hitman Hart. That was awesome. Like, he got to a point where him and Shawn Michaels were holding the WWE basically down for years after... Like when they decided to move away from everything they had in the 80s, like late 80s through the 80s, early 90s, like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart like went to the forefront.
Yeah.
And Bret got tired of a lot of shit that was going on back then. Yeah. And he decided to form
Montreal Screwjob's a whole nother
back
story.
In the day he was a tag team with the Hart was it the Hart Foundation?
Yeah.
With Neidhart.
Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Owen Hart.
Owen Hart.
I think wasn't
British Bulldog.
British Bulldog.
And Brian Pullman even joined them because I think he had relations with the family.
Yeah.
Davey Boy, the British Bulldog.
Yeah.
Because they were all family. They were like legit family in real life. Like the Stu Hart dungeon.
It's like the Canadian.
All the greatest Canadian wrestlers.
It's like the Canadian version of the Bloodline.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And it was awesome. Like, Bret Hart finally started coming to his own. The one thing about Bret Hart, he never was great on the microphone. But he was the best in the ring. Like,
you loved him.
Oh,
You
he was
loved
awesome.
him.
As a kid, man, he used to take those shades off and give them to you in the front row. Like, that was everything.
You loved him.
Yeah, he was fucking unbelievable.
Yeah,
dude.
the Hart Foundation, I know, was one of your favorites.
They were.
So what about, like, who did they feud against?
Everybody. Remember when he went against that whole, like, he hated America?
Like Demolition and...
Well, that was when they were the tag team. Remember back in, like, fucking... when he formed the Hart Foundation, like, he was trying to take over, like, the WWE. He was done with Vince McMahon. He hated America because I think it was a Heartbreak Kid. That was who he was feuding against all the time. Yeah. And Shawn Michaels was getting breaks after break after break, and he kept saying, I'm getting cheated. And then it ended up to the Montreal Screwjob.
One of the biggest.
And then he just writes WCW.
Yeah, it was one of the
because he left and he ended up joining the NWO.
Yeah,
that's how stupid the NWO got. By the way, when we talk about these factions, they can go too.
Yeah, he was nothing in WCW. It was done.
It was a big deal when he showed up, but then it went to nothing. Yeah. Then he ended up having a stroke and.
Yeah, he just Yeah, I know you loved him.
Bret Hart's one of my favorite of all time, man.
Yeah.
The execution of executioners. The best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. That's all he ever had to say.
Yep. And it was great, dude. Like, that's so simple. So simple.
The sharpshooter, still one of the greatest fucking finishers of all time.
Better than, you're going to get us in a conversation about finishers now.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other episode, buddy. We'll save that for another day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just like talking about these factions. Obviously, bring us back a lot of memories of how we grew up in the business, how we appreciate things. I'm sure we missed some factions today. We'd love to hear about it. Nations of Domination come to mind. The Rock, Farouk, Undisputed Era in NXT. The League of Nations that we talked about last week with Sheamus. But, like, Nations of Dominations probably had, turned The Rock into who he is. Mm-hmm. When he got Farouk the gift and then smashed the picture over his head, and he had, who did he have? He had D'Lo Brown.
D'Lo Brown, yeah. That was
he had Viscera. Remember Viscera?
Yeah. He was a part of the Ministries of Darkness,
too. Yeah. And, obviously you had Farouk. Farouk and D'Lo Brown were like the head of it. You had Viscera, The Rock joined it, and I'm missing somebody. I think there was a fifth member. But those are like some factions that like weren't big. Didn't
have a long time on those.
But also had like The Rock became The Rock.
As a part of
he went from Rocky.
Part of significant.
He went from like Die Rocky Die to The Rock that night he slammed the picture over Farouk's head.
Yeah.
Like, it was no more joke anymore.
Batista got paid off by being part of Evolution.
Yeah.
Batista would have just been another one of those Vince guys that's fucking roided out of his mind.
Yeah,
and not saying he was on roids, but just looks like that.
When Batista won the Royal Rumble and Triple H was the World Heavyweight Champion, which was SmackDown, and when he gives him the thumbs down.
Gladiator style.
Was one of the best moments.
And puts Orton through the...
Yeah. And he's just like, I'm coming for that title. That was the moment where a faction broke up and created a superstar who's now a Hollywood guy.
Evolution, like they pushed Randy Orton in the beginning. He wasn't
Evolution had to do the same thing. I mean, Randy Orton had to do the same thing.
Yep. And from Evolution, Randy Orton became
the Legacy.
Yep.
When he started Legacy.
And then he became Randy Orton.
I mean, there's so much history.
Cody Rhodes was in Legacy.
Yeah. Ted DiBiase Jr.
Not to mention his own family's legacy. I mean, like.
And I heard that Dustin Rhodes is a free agent now.
Oh, really? I always love seeing Dustin.
Gold Dust.
I don't like him as Gold Dust. I mean, I get the Gold Dust character.
Gold Dust was hilarious, man.
I love watching the Rhodes in the ring. I think they're just... Dustin is, to this day, one of my favorite. That guy can put anyone over in a match. Right?
Is there any... Before we stop this episode and end it, is there any factions that you can remember that were supposed to be big and failed?
I don't know.
One comes to mind with me is the Hurt Business with Bobby Lashley. I mean, they're trying to revive it in AEW.
Right.
But Bobby Lashley, Shelton Benjamin, MVP.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Cedric Alexander. They tried to, like, make these things, and they could have been good. But, like, that's one that sticks out to me that failed.
Yeah. I think sometimes they try too hard. It's always good to have factions, but, man, you really have to have the right people, the right timing. Timing's everything, I think.
I really hope that they can, like, current day factions of Final Testament, Wyatt Six. Like, I hope that these can kind of go. But,
like, I forgot about the League of Nations, so I just saw it recently, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier, but that was a cool one with Alberto Del Rio, Sheamus, and
yeah, but you can consider that maybe a failed one.
Yeah,
it
has a little run,
but you know, factions I think are designed to bring a group of people together, get them acclimated to storytelling,
be rememberable,
and then go out on your own.
Yep,
and that's essentially what these factions we spoke about
Sometimes
tonight.
factions are born from like people already being superstars and then having to do it
they
just to reinvent themselves.
And I think like that's kind of what we want to talk what we wanted to talk about tonight was the greatest factions, how they got dismantled, how they got started, and why they got started. You know, and I think that you guys tonight got to see a little bit insight of our favorite stuff. A lot of our stuff was from the late 90s.
And we're going to do episodes on each one of these factions.
Yeah,
like
the Brave,
as the show keeps going, we're going to
the Wyatt family is for sure someone we need to.
Yeah. We could do it on all of them and just really talk about that timeline. We're trying to fit fucking years of storytelling into 30 minutes to an hour. So we got to just touch on what we can touch on, But
no, we really appreciate it. We hope everybody is having a great holiday season.
Yes.
This is obviously a special episode, not talking about current day wrestling, but talking about some of our childhood and what we think about the factions of wrestling.
Yeah, chime in. Hit us up.
Yeah, tell us. I'm sure we missed a few.
Spark our brains.
Yeah. If we missed a few, let us know. We'll talk about them. But like always, we hope everybody's having a great season. And KT, what do you think? We're wrapping it up?
Hell yeah, man. ELE.
In the great words of Jackie Moon.
Everybody love everybody.
ELE, baby. Peace.
Peace out.